Growing a population with 25% in 7 years creates some friction. So some people are a bit uneasy with a very fast pace of expansion. And in recent elections, the government lost tremendously, in Singapore style, I have to say, because they went from 75% to 62% of the popular vote. And with 62%, you still have a majority, but yet they felt a little bit the push. These whales that you pay a lot to be scientists in your laboratory are internationally mobile, and that has created some volatility. There is clearly pressure on the infrastructure, transport, housing, and education, and that's probably where the unease of the population with that fast growth comes from. They feel that the metros, the coaches are a bit too full, that it sometimes is difficult to get your child in the right school, etc., because there's all that foreign talent. It's not sure that that million people that joined Singapore over the last 7 years necessarily is loyal and committed to the development of Singapore, such as the government wants it to have. And you see the difficulties of integration. I wrote down there the difference between Chinese versus Chinaman. I work with a mainly Chinese group of people in my office. Chinese, racially Chinese, but long-term in Singapore. And they don't talk about people from the People's Republic of China as Chinese. They're Chinamen. And that's a very different concept. Racially, they may be the same, but in terms of attitude, in terms of integration, it's a very different group of people. And then you have what's happening in every society that is successful, complacency among the younger generation that is perhaps not anymore as hardworking as their parents were. They grew up under very comfortable conditions and maybe don't feel that need to fight, don't have that fighting spirit anymore that is so typical for the first generations of the Chinese and of the Indians and the Eurasians, I should say, in Singapore. And perhaps their value systems are somewhat changing. Now, there are other models in the world of expanding population. There is Australia that has immigration and education as a business. Malaysia that is trying to emulate the Singapore model, but in very selected and concentrated areas. They're building a new city that is called Iskandar, just across the straits in Johor, next to Singapore, where they basically copy Singapore. Singapore 2. Iskandar is the name of the Sultan there, so they're building that totally new city. Korea South Korea, right, is an interesting case of developing itself internationally by creating internationally attractive universities where there's a lot more teaching in English. And that way they want to attract a lot more foreigners to get used to work with Korea. And then of course we have the traditional model of the United Kingdom and France, where education of people coming out of Africa or Latin America or Asia or the Far East is, education of these people is a vector of integration, of cultural integration in the society. Now, my last transparency is basically my very personal take on it. Why does it work more or less in Singapore? And I'm very much willing in the Q&A to go into the difficulties that I actually described. But it does work because I see that a very well-managed diversity can be beneficial to an economy. But it's a managed diversity. It is not left to chance, to coincidence. If you see, those among you who ever have been to Singapore, you will have that picture of these huge, what they call HDB, Housing Development Board flats, the big towers where they have social housing and where about 86% of the Singapore population lives. Those Housing Development Board units are with quotas, with racial quotas. In other words, they're exactly 70% Chinese, 20% Malay, 10% Indians, whatever Indies, because there is a managed integration of people. It's a managed diversity. And that's perhaps why Singapore feels a bit heavy sometimes, because they don't leave anything to coincidence. And that sort of strangles maybe creativity. Successful integration has also to do with what I think are the three key elements, that is good governance, good transparent governance. No, everybody will probably know that there is no corruption. While you may not like the government, you don't distrust the government. You may hate the government, as about 30% of the population does. But you can't say that they're not trustworthy. They don't cheat on you, in general.